We're going live. All right, so welcome everyone to this new panel debate. This is part of the series of OWASP talks that we are organizing online here at OWASP Copenhagen. Today we're going to talk about post-pandemic cybersecurity. So I'll usually start with an introduction about OWASP and what we do and what is OWASP more globally. So I'll go with that. After that, we'll actually enter the panel debate. So let me start with this. So what is OWASP? The mission of OWASP is, well, OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project, which is a non-profit foundation improving the security of software. This is a community-led open source software set of projects. We have many chapters worldwide, which also create the actual community, and a lot of members, a lot of educational institutions, and also training conferences that are related to the OWASP Foundation. We have, yes, the OWASP community is really the backbone. So OWASP is a worldwide free and open community. So everybody is welcome to join us. And we're focused on improving the security of application software. The mission is to make application security visible so that people and organizations can make informed decisions without application security risks. There's a lot of nice words here. It's all free. The matter is that, like, the important thing is that this is an inclusive community. We want to have everybody welcome to participate in the OWASP community and the events we do. And all our events are free, except the big conferences that the Central OWASP organization is organizing. So again, a bit about the OWASP Foundation. It's a global non-profit. It's vendor neutral, and the idea is to make a community. So to put together all the best minds in the world of application security, and to provide free tools, guidance, and documentation. Our meetings are free to attend. You're welcome to join. This is virtual. Hopefully, when we go back, we'll be able to throw in some free drinks and food, as we usually did. And we typically meet for 2-hour seminars, something around that. We have many chapters around the world, and more coming. There's lots of projects you can contribute to, so I welcome you to actually join these projects. Let's see. Also we have 2 chapters here in Denmark, Aarhus and Copenhagen. We have a bunch of volunteers. I am one of them, but the team that actually made this event possible is a lot bigger than that. I'm Alessandro. I'm associate professor at the IT University of Copenhagen and typically host these events. But I have Andrada, who helped me, who helped us actually prepare the event, get the panelists, find all the organize the evening. So I'm just the executor here. Together with Josephine, they work together in preparing this night. So I would like to thank them for this. There's Dakota, who really helped us with organizing all the communication, like the video editing and so on. So that's
okay.
Ja. Jeg muter lige.
Okay. So we're getting the panelists ready. But anyway, so yes, we have Dakota, we have Jens, who's helping us behind the scenes, and also Klaus, who's helping us behind the scenes to find interesting speakers. But you could help us, right? I really want to stress that this is really a community project, and we want to make this community grow. And so I'd like really you to be also able to help us in this. There are many different projects that OWASP has. I just want to put in one. Maybe I'll put one every time. This is OWASP SAP. I think many of you who actually work in the technical application security know this tool. It's one of the tools that are used to actually interact with web applications in a way to actually find flows and vulnerabilities, to do some typical scans, etc., etc. So there are many projects like this that you can contribute here. There's the cheat sheet. There's a whole bunch. Let's see. There's the defect dojo. And I think these are all slides that I try to hide, but here's a bunch of projects that we have. So if you're interested, come join and make these projects better. We really need your contributions to the projects. You can help us with organizing events with a local chapter, and also become a member, because memberships are what sponsors, what makes this actually a community, so that you can contribute and help us get interesting speakers, pay for all the basic things that we need for making this stuff free and available for everyone. Yes, provide some words of encouragement to the project leaders. It's a whole lot of work to organize this stuff, and I would like to really thank the team we have for the support. And it will be even more when we actually have to create physical events. We're running free in this sense. We have some like it's easy to organize a night relatively to actually having to do something physical on a physical space. But it's all great work, and really appreciate it. Yes, and obviously if you have proposals for talks and ideas, I really encourage you to come with opportunities, right? And start an OS project, or start an OS chapter if you find there's some place here in Denmark that needs an OS chapter. We'll be in touch. So indeed, let's keep in touch. We have a whole bunch of medias that we talk on. There's the Twitter account OWASP-CPH. We have a Slack channel, Chapters Copenhagen. There's the YouTube. Here I put OWASP Global, but actually we have our local YouTube account, the one you're watching at right now. There's the meetup page to which you signed up, and of course the OWASP website. So you're very welcome to contact us and get engaged. The plan for tonight is my intro here, which is done. Probably took a bit too long, but now we go on with the presentation from Martin from Saxo Bank. Then we have a presentation from Oksana from ITU. Then we talk about our post-pandemic scenario, our panel debate with Lone and Luke. And we'll have individual questions to our panelists, and then Oksana's reflections at the end. And we'll close up with some free dialogue and a thank you and a good night at the end. So let me just introduce our panelists. We have Lone, who's Senior Security Architect at Bang & Olufsen, formerly at NNIT and in the Danish police. Luke Herbert Andersen, who's a PhD in computer science, like me. We were PhD at DTU, slightly different periods, but I know him well. And he doesn't say much more than that, but I'm sure we'll discover something tonight. There's Martin Clausen, who's Chief Security Architect at and Head of Architecture, Research and Development at Saxo Bank, and previously Head of Cyber Innovation Labs at Danske Bank. Oksana, finally, who's Assistant Professor at the Center for Information Security and Trust at the IT University of Copenhagen. She is co-PI of the ASCD project, which is essentially assessment on the status of cybersecurity in Denmark, which is, I think, very relevant for tonight's panel debate. So without further ado, I would like to give the word to our first speaker, Martin.
Thank you very much.
So let me unshare my screen. I think you can share screen and get going with the presentation. Let's see. Yes, we have you.
All good?
I can see your presentation.
Cool. So thank you very much for inviting me and letting me share some thoughts that I've had over time regarding IT and cybersecurity in this Corona times. And I've collected some thoughts, some observations, but also some suggestions for how things how you can work proactively with security in this time and age, and also maybe some insights on how you can utilize, let's say, some more agile ways of dealing with cybersecurity that standard products might not be able to help with. So my name is Martin. I have 18 years of professional experience with security. My interest with security with the computers really started a lot earlier when I started programming on a Commodore 128 because it had 128 bytes of RAM. But really, I mean, playing with the networks at DTU is what got me really interested in security. And I recently joined Saxo Bank from Danske Bank, and my role really is to improve security by making smart decisions. And today, I will share what I think that some of those could be. So in the past year, we have been living under this very strange world order. And almost overnight, I think it's fair to say that it changed the way we work and also how we connect to systems and services. And in reality, most people, even though that they were used to going to office and never imagined that they would be remote workers, became remote workers. I think that to some degree, some of the smaller businesses out there that have by far relied on cloud services also before the pandemic may not have experienced a big change in the way that they work, but certainly larger businesses and enterprises have responded by doing what they've always done, and that is to provide VPN access to a lot of their resources, very often, of course, by adding more capacity, and maybe also providing some cloud services, collaboration tools such as Zoom or Teams to improve the way that people can collaborate online. There's also been a lot of debate about a lot of these, I would say, productivity services, especially Zoom, some of it fair, some of it unfair. But I think a lot of the concerns that have been raised about those are really common for all these collaborative services. So I would say that in the short term, everything has, I think, worked out with great success because businesses have kept moving along. Everything has not been stopped, and that's good. But in that case, I would also argue that there has been a lot of risk acceptance, simply just to get stuff done. And the question then is that whether a VPN architecture really is the best solution to working from home, also in the long run. And maybe there are other challenges as well besides that. So working from home, some of the challenges that everyone faces is not just about attackers. It can also be a lot about legislation, how data is protected, access, stored, shared, and so on.
May I stop you for a second?
Yes.
You can turn on your camera so people see you as well. If you press back on the camera button, you will see.
I thought I had it on. I didn't turn it off.
It turns off when, like, if you go back to Jitsi.
Yes, let me just try that.
Yes, you can turn on the camera again, so we see you. We see Luke. All right. Yes, now we see you. and back to the presentation. Sorry for the interruption.
That's fine. I thought I was sharing it. But yeah, so I was coming from that. That of course the move, while it has been a success in the sense that business have kept operating. Many have also taken up a lot of risk, either willingly or unwillingly, simply just to keep things moving. But of course, while a VPN connection is encrypted, you often need a lot more security around it to protect users and the business data. So some of the challenges that many face include increased IT cost for additional hardware. Maybe there's been a company policy not to provide laptops to everyone, so there's been a lot of desktops maybe. You would have to increase the network bandwidth also from a personal level. If you are a family and everyone is sent home, you will need a pretty okay and stable internet connection to deal with that. And then there might also be increased costs around cloud services. You will have faced patch management challenges, so systems that would be online or could be turned on when they were in the office, they might be offline, might be online, offline in various ways. And also sometimes the updates would require a lot of bandwidth, especially when you try to send a huge update through a 3G connection. Then we of course also have shadow IT, because people have just simply been focusing on getting stuff done. But that also means that very often people will not really know where the data is stored and which systems that have been used, whether they're still using it or not. Security monitoring and incident response, again, if something happens, the systems might not be connected. How do you quarantine a device? And again, from a recovery point of view, how do you perform a system build-up if you need to restore, for instance, the OS after you have identified malware on the device? You might also have to deal with backup, restore, and so on. So I think in reality, a lot of different challenges, and people have tried to solve them or work around them in many ways. But what really should happen is that instead of making the network the centerpiece, you really want to focus on the identity of the user and the devices that they use. And then with that in mind, you can then assign a more flexible policy. And I'll also get back to that. And if you end up succeeding in finding a good solution to that, it also becomes less relevant if the user is in the office or if the user is working remotely. The large uptake in cloud is definitely going to be a challenge for security teams going forward. There will be a lot of additional controls, a lot of different assessments that you need to perform around identity and access management to protect access to data. Because as soon as you use a cloud service, software as a service, then really one of the first controls you have is the identities and credentials. But what have we actually seen during the pandemic? To some surprise, maybe we have actually just seen a lot of the same that we also saw previously. There have, of course, been a large uptake in COVID-related phishing mails, phishing themes, and so on. And very often it's related to news articles. So in that sense, attackers are of course still opportunistic and also read the news. Two trends do stand out, and that is that there's been a big increase in credential harvesting and also identity-based attacks, simply based on either known compromised credentials or password guessing for online services as well. And then in some industries, there has also been an uptick in VPN exploits, renewed research into VPN software, trying to find ways in, simply because now with the increased use of VPN, that is of course a very I would say a very good way to compromise people, because typically if you compromise the VPN device, you are in. So what can be done? So really, in my view, one of the things that have to change is that people should start to adopt zero trust more, because of what we just talked about. That really, I mean, perimeter defenses, they are really not adequate anymore, because they put a lot of trust into where you work from, in an office or not. And if you are in the office, then the network may actually be very open, and you may have access to a lot of corporate resources by default. And what a VPN really does is simply to transport a given device into that internal network. The ideas and principles behind Zero Trust were developed around the mid 2000s, but to my knowledge, were first really implemented by Google around 2010 in the aftermath of what's known as Operation Aurora, where Google, along with a number of other high-tech companies, were compromised by allegedly the Chinese state. At that point, they thought, how can we prevent something like this to happen again? And they basically transformed their entire standard infrastructure into what they call Beyond Corp, and which is really based on zero trust principles. And some of those are to move defenses from network-based perimeters to focus more on users' devices and what they want to access. So from a security trust architecture point of view, it's really like a roadmap that uses zero trust concepts and how these connect and interact. In short, you might argue that zero trust can be summarized as verify explicitly, use least privileged, and assume breach. One way to work with zero trust, or one way to visualize zero trust, can be done in many different ways. This is just an example from how Microsoft defines zero trust as part of their cloud architecture, where to the left you have all the identities and devices. Maybe it's fair to say that a lot of companies will try and say that identity is the new perimeter. While that is true, you also have to manage devices and measure them as well. So it's really about identities as well as devices. With those two in mind, and given different types of statuses, different ways to authenticate, whether the device is deemed as risky or not, maybe it's a domain joined laptop, maybe it's not, maybe it's a personal laptop, then you can assign a policy to that specific session and device. And with that, you can then decide on the back end how and when and if a specific session can be allowed into, for instance, an internal application or internal infrastructure. And so I thought it would be interesting to just talk a little bit about zero trust versus the SolarWinds Orion case that has been discussed a lot in the media recently. One way to look at a typical setup would be something like this, where you have the Orion platform sitting behind a firewall. It would then be, in this specific case, a Windows domain joined server with access to other servers, potentially also managing or monitoring network devices. And if we then look at some of the ways that this attack was a success, you could say that the software update with the backdoor was in fact installed. Antivirus, blacklisting, whatever next-gen AI product would not have been affected, or in this specific case, definitely was not affected. But let's just say that the software got in. There would still be things that could have been implemented to mitigate this specific threat. Some of it would be to not allow DNS lookups from the server. That was one of the specific tests to see whether the Orion server had internet access. The other part being that internet access was in fact allowed. The Orion server and the installs that were compromised were seemingly allowed to access internet resources in a very broad sense. There were really no restrictions there. Then what's also a bit troublesome, and that's probably a fundamental problem with the architecture that Orion has implemented, in that it definitely does not use least privilege. In fact, all the services that Orion is made up of all run as a local system, which means that they're running with the highest privileges. So now you then have a backdoor running on a server with the highest level of privileges, and then there's really not a lot that this service cannot do. Everything from running Mimikatz, dumping credentials, to also trying to disable the different endpoint security software tools that very often would be running, of course, on the server. With that in mind, using credential dumping, lateral movement, and so on within the network, because very often some of these networks are maybe not segmented to the degree that they should, and so on and so on. So really a lot of fails in this regard, and to be honest, I think that if some of the installations had been, or the surroundings, the security architecture in which this specific product would be running could have been hardened a bit more, then in this case, the backdoor had not been successful. So one way to go from architecture and concepts, principles to a specific implementation would be to use what's come to known as SASE, or Security Access Software Edge, which is really a quite complex service collapsing a lot of different products, both from a network point of view, but also from a security point of view. But again, the idea with this is really to only allow access to your resources, whether on-prem, whether in your own data center, or on the cloud, based on, again, identity and device. In which case, the VPN sessions, so to say, also become very zero trust based. In this example from Gartner, you see different types of devices, either IoT devices, users using mobile phones, or maybe a user using a laptop, whatever, wants to log into, for instance, AWS, Azure. It could also be Office 365 or an on-prem application. But the only way to access that device would be to go through this SASE service. And again, based on device and identity, a policy would be attached to the session. And then if everything checks out, the user or device would be allowed access to the specific service. So one thing I've been reflecting a bit about is also very often that that some security controls or security services rely on signatures or machine learning models. And while that is good and fine, when you have such a radical change in the way that everyone consumes services, those models may not be valid anymore, because really the way that you construct a model is using data, baselining it, figuring out what good looks like, what bad looks like, and then you create a model that fits that. But if you at the sudden start to see a huge change in traffic patterns, in the way that people authenticate, when they authenticate, where they authenticate from, then maybe some of those patterns will actually not be meaningful anymore, and you might be able to, actually miss the important points. So another way to, or one way to deal with that type of scenario would be to work with some of the products, or have alternative services available, where with the data you have already collected, with the data you're already now collecting, you will be able to experiment with new ways of looking at the data, with new models. For instance, in Elasticsearch, they have recently added the capability to do your own supervised machine learning, and so that is definitely one way you could deal with it. Another example could be that Microsoft's Azure Sentinel also now offers bring your own machine learning models for you to work with, again based on your data, and that's, I think, also an important point. Because if you have really a critical mass, if you have a big enterprise with a lot of users, then there will be patterns, and there will be ways that services are consumed that maybe in some cases be fairly unique to your business, and therefore it might be that if the models are not constructed out of the box in the right way, maybe they're not really that successful. But being able to take the products and tune them and tweak them into something that might be more efficient for you, I think is definitely going to be a thing going forward. And with that, thanks. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions, or whether we'll do that later.
Thanks a lot. I think it will be later. In the interest of time, I would move on to the next speaker for tonight, just to follow the program for the night. And we'll of course come up with questions. I think it was really interesting. So I will give the speaker the word to Oksana. Mm-hmm. So Oksana, if you have a presentation, you can share screen and then press your camera again, so we'll see your face.
Yeah, so let me see. So I share my screen. And then
we see your screen.
You can see my screen. Then I turn on my camera again.
And we see both. Great.
And then what happens if I make it full screen? Do you still see all you need to see?
Yes, we see everything.
Okay,
perfect.
Great.
There you go.
Great, then I can start. So the talk I'm giving today is about the project we actually finished up quite recently. And as Alessandro mentioned, the project is about the assessment of cybersecurity in Denmark. Now, this is a research project, so shorter asked. And this is a project financed by the Center for Cybersecurity in Denmark. It was running last year, so we just finished writing the final report in December, and now we're focusing on preparing the results for the publications in scientific venues. It's a collaboration of ITU and STU. So from STU, Thiago Pomaro is participating as a co-PI, and overall we have an interdisciplinary team because it is a project that involves studying both technical aspects of security as well as human and organizational aspects, which is why we have computer scientists and experts in software development, but we also have social scientists working on the project. And the goal of the project is to understand the cybersecurity challenges that Danish companies face in their daily work. So not just to figure out whether the situation is good or bad, but also to understand what the problems are and maybe make some first steps towards suggestions. How can we fix this problem? How can we, as research community, help? And the project has followed the methodology of the so-called mixed methods design, meaning that it had two phases. One was the online survey that we have performed in order to give some quantitative insights, so some numbers to help us figure out the trends in cybersecurity in Denmark. And the survey involved 100 and something participants from different companies. So we specifically try to target very diverse sectors, participants in very diverse roles, from management to software developers to CISOs to people who have whose job doesn't have anything to do with tech, to understand again what are their practices, what are their challenges in their workplace. And as I said, the goal was to get a broad overview, to get some numbers, to get some trends, what is going on in terms of cybersecurity in companies. So this was the first phase. And the second phase was to get some qualitative insights, so to combine the quantitative and the qualitative results. And this phase consisted of ethnographic interviews, which were done by the social scientists in the team. And the interviews involved 11 participants, again, from different roles who aimed at interviewing management, software developers, and security experts in companies, again, to see different perspectives, different views on cybersecurity issues. And the purpose was to provide some further insights in addition to numbers, so that the numbers might be able to tell us what is going on, but the interviews allowed us to gain some deeper insights to understand not just what is going on, but also why is it going on, why are the trends as they are shown in the survey, and or maybe what are the problems, what are the issues that we didn't detect by the survey, but that were more prominent when we actually sat down with people and talked to them about their experience in their workplace. So we investigated a number of topics. So our broad topic was cybersecurity and privacy issues in Danish companies. We wanted to focus more on tech companies, on software development companies, but we also included, as I said, companies from many different sectors. And there was a variety of topics we talked about, and we investigated general cybersecurity, security and privacy management and policies. Again, both from the view of the security managers, so how do they decide which security policies to implement, whether they follow some standards, if not, why don't they follow standards, and what are the challenges in implementing these standards, but also from the view of non-security people who basically just are told which policies to follow, and we wanted to know, do they actually follow these policies? Is it maybe too difficult? Is it maybe not clear? Do they have sufficient trainings in the companies? So everything around this topic. Then we we investigated the views of the developers, and namely if they are developing some software products, how they actually integrate the security and practice and privacy techniques in the software development processes. Do they do it on a continuous basis? If they're doing agile, how is security is integrated in the whole agile workflows? Or is it the case that they're mostly treating it as an afterthought after the other functionalities are implemented? We talk about GDPR because, again, it was a huge issue that appeared quite relatively recently, so 2.5 years ago. And we felt that companies were still struggling with this. So we also included this as a topic in our project, again, to see how companies ensure compliance with the GDPR. Do they know what they should do? Do they understand when they have some data that actually is relevant for the GDPR? And in general, what do they think about GDPR? Do they think that it is helpful for data protection? Do they think that it's harmful for their business? What are their perspectives on this? And the final topic highlighted is, of course, the topic of today's meetup is what are the experiences of people working in companies with pandemic-related changes? Because the project was started last year, and more or less at the same time as everyone went into lockdown, and as Martin said, suddenly a lot of people became remote workers, having to deal with this. So this was also a large part of our investigation. And because of the lack of time, I would not touch about all of these topics and all of the findings. The report is publicly available online, so you are welcome to take a look at it if you're interested. But I'm going to mention what we found out on the pandemic side. So first of all, from the quantitative part of the project, from the online survey, we asked people whether they have any increased concerns, or how have their security and privacy concerns changed since the pandemic. And as you can see, actually, they didn't change much. So for the most of people, they either are not concerned, they were not concerned before, or they're not concerned now. As a large number of people, they were concerned before, but they are not concerned more because of the pandemic, and only a relatively small percentage of people actually had increased concerns because of the pandemic. So again, this was interesting for us to know because, as Martin mentioned, and as you also hear quite often right now, the pandemic actually did lead to increased cyber attacks, to increased issues with cybersecurity, but still this was not reflected in actual concerns that people had. We also asked about the policies for remote work that people have in their companies, whether people found them challenging, and whether people even knew about these policies. And again, from our quantitative findings, it looked like it is actually not an issue for most of the people. People find the remote work policies either not challenging at all or mostly not challenging. Only very few find them challenging. Again, this might be because people are just so good at following good security policies, but it might be the case that the policies are simply really, really basic, so people don't have any challenges because there are almost no policies. And we also asked about the experience with remote work, and here actually we can also see one of the reasons why people might not have concerns because of the pandemic or challenges with remote work options. And this is because, as you can see on the lower graph, actually a large amount of people already had experience with remote work. So this might be the case with tech companies who are maybe more used to this kind of work. And as you can see on this, on the graphs, actually people in smaller companies tended to work remotely more before the pandemic than larger companies. So again, it ties in with what Martin said, that maybe for them not much has actually changed since everyone has to move remote. So this was the quantitative findings. So we got some numbers, we got the trends, but again, we can look at the numbers, we can come to different conclusions, which is why we had interviews, and we also asked people questions about the pandemic and how do they deal with the pandemic issues in their company. And again, a large amount of our participants said that there has been no changes in the way that the company deals with security and privacy with regards to the pandemic. So people talked about people in Denmark in general having inherent trust, meaning that they just trust people to take home their laptops, their documents, whatever they need, and not do anything reckless with this or not do anything illegal with this, but just do the right thing and more or less behave. So there was this topic of inherent trust in many of among the respondents. And then some of the respondents mentioned that they relied a lot on cloud-based services, which meant for them that a lot of services were remote already. So they didn't have to change much. Again, as Martin said, this might be one of the issues or one of the reasons why for many companies nothing has changed much. Still, there were some people who said that they had even less security concerns because of the pandemic, and the reason they provided is that they felt that working from home meant a safer environment. The reason being is that if people have to share the office, their colleagues might have access to their desk. Maybe clients coming into the offices have access to their desk. Maybe someone like cleaning staff can come to their offices. And when they're at home, they are either alone or living with people like their family, whom again they trust. So they felt like working from home is actually a safer environment in certain aspects than working at the office. Yet there were still people who did acknowledge the increased security concerns because of the pandemic. And as such, they said that yes, they had to implement some new policies that were not quite relevant before. And they also said that security actually served as a catalyst for implementing these policies, meaning that the policies were somehow planned even before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, they were suddenly faced with this issue that they have to implement these policies right now, and they have to do it fast. So here are some quotes summarizing from the participants. So the first quote is about this question of trust, and in Denmark, it's like we trust people to take their laptop home, and we don't expect them to take any company data. And the second quote is on seeing the pandemic as a catalyst for increased security, again, for implementing maybe new services, for implementing new policies, and so on. To summarize, so we have heard, again, as Martin said, as you can actually hear quite a lot if you follow the news, there are warnings about increased security risks with the pandemic. So there are reports from Interpol, there is quite a flow from the so-called corona phishing messages, where people, for example, impersonate the WHO organizations and send phishing emails to people. So this has been a thing, and there has been some increased security risks if you trust these reports. But at the same time, what we saw in our project is that people in companies, or at least a large share of people in companies, didn't really perceive these concerns as something relevant to them. So whichever security and privacy concerns they had in the organization, these were not dependent much on the pandemic. And there can be several reasons for this. Of course, the worst possible reason is that they simply don't know that there are actually risks, so they don't implement any extra measures simply because they don't feel like they are actually at risk. But maybe actually there are some better reasons. Maybe they are already sufficiently prepared. For example, if a lot of their employees were working remotely already before the pandemic, or maybe there are other reasons why people are not concerned about the security. So this remains another open research question that we might look into in our future research. All right, I think we'll have time for presentation.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Oksana, for the presentation. I think it actually ties well together with Martin's presentation. Martin talked a lot about the technical challenges that we're facing when going to a post-pandemic world where we have to move more of our work online and remote. And you talked about the actual perceptions that people have experienced across the this timeline that we all suffer through. And so I think this is really interesting data, and it's cool that actually we get real data instead of just talking about stuff, and this is a great experience. So I'd like to move forward to...
Turn it off, or can you do this?
Come again?
Do I have to stop sharing, or?
You can stop sharing, and I will share screen so we can see the questions for the other two panelists. I will go back to my presentation. Where is my presentation? Here. Yes. And so, well, here are our panelists, but the next slide is the question that we have for the two panelists who haven't spoken yet. So my question for you is, you wake up a morning a year from now. The COVID vaccine has been distributed globally. There is generally a sense of relief, and many learnings have come from the last 2 years of dealing with the pandemic. New perspectives have been uncovered regarding the capability to work from home, and both private and public organizations and the people working in them have experienced the challenges of dealing with major societal changes. As you wake up this morning, what are the main challenges that organizations are facing in the cybersecurity and threat landscape, and which types of cyber capabilities are most crucial for their future success and survival? So, with that said, I would like Lone to take the first round. You have 5 to 10 minutes to give us your thought in this direction.
Okay, thank you. So in order to talk about what is the main challenges that we face after a pandemic, I think it's very important to kind of address what the pandemic, what kind of impact the pandemic has had on the world, and what this impact means for cybersecurity. So one of the impacts that we have seen is unemployment, which has been caused by impact on the world economy. And that means from a cybersecurity perspective, at least we have seen that with the last financial crisis that we have, that more people are driven to commit cybercrime due to the new circumstances that they're in. So we definitely need to expect an increase in attack, both during and after the pandemic. So if this is 2 years after, of course, it depends on how bad are we financially impacted, and how will this affect the amount of attacks that we will see. And we have already now, in the beginning of the pandemic already, and throughout the pandemic, seen an increase in a lot of attacks. Furthermore, we also have cyber criminals that are using social engineering as part of their attacks. And they're often adapting their attacks to what is currently relevant in the world. So as we saw also in the beginning with COVID-19, we started to see these COVID-19 related cyber attacks. And I think we need to be aware of that both during and after the pandemic. So we are so focused on the pandemic and what has to be done, and we have to keep putting focus on how can this be exploited by cyber criminals. So one of the challenges to keep up with the trends of these attacks and to continuously inform and train employees to be aware. Conceptually, that is no different than what we have to do at any other time. The difference is here that we need to consider is how people are affected by the pandemic. First of all, they are focused on the pandemic. They might not expect cyber criminals to exploit it, so it might even not be a consideration that someone would do that. At the same time, when you are affected by a situation, then you are less aware of threats that seems less real to you. So kind of like, how are people like understanding people, that side of security, in order to help us protect against them, and make an effort, like extra effort, in order to keep the awareness high. And if we return to the economy, then for some companies and organizations also, they will be impacted by the world economy, and they might have to decrease some of their budgets, either because the situation has affected their company's income, or merely because some of the nervousness in the market. That is kind of like during the pandemic. I'm not a financial expert, so I don't know how that will affect the post-pandemic, how the market would go, but we definitely need to look into that, because some companies can choose, when their budgets are decreased, to decrease the budget of cybersecurity as well, because right now you might be in a survival mode, you might be focused on your incomes, and that means they might choose to keep the security status quo. And in a security world, that means you're not adapting to new changes, and that means you're actually falling behind. They might have to fire cybersecurity employees. They might reprioritize their software portfolio and not renew licenses for cybersecurity projects. So if this happens during the pandemic, then after the pandemic, they're going to be further behind. They're not going to have the ability to kind of withstand the cybersecurity threats that are there. So they're entering the post-pandemic in a more vulnerable state, and they need to kind of get back on that. If you kind of combine these two, you kind of have a not so good cocktail. So you have more attacks, and you have a higher chance of this attack succeeding. But on the lucky side, what we have seen lately, at least here in Denmark, is there's been a rise of attention from the boardrooms on cybersecurity, which means, at least for some companies, the cybersecurity budget will not be decreased, and there will be a focus on it. So that's a good side. If we look a little bit away from the world economy in the pandemic, then, as the other participants has also spoken about, then there is this whole situation of working from home, which is both impacting currently during the pandemic, but I think also it might have a chance to impact how we work later on. So after the pandemic, there might be a bigger flexibility to work remotely or at home and look more into this situation. For larger companies, as Martin also said, a lot of them probably had employees working remotely before, and they were up and running with the VPN and so on. They might have some VPN capacity issues, but they were running really fast in a certain stage. But I think also that Martin was talking a little bit about that. It might not be the way to go anymore. So they were up and running, and they were at a certain level, but they have to maybe rethink their setup, because we come from this more old school paramedic centric defense. And it's better to start to look into a more identity-centric defense with the new world, where you don't know the location of your employees. When it comes to smaller companies, I do agree with Martin that if they're very cloud-based, they might be up to date. But I think also there's a lot of smaller companies who never had the option of working from home, maybe had offices with computers there. And in order to support their employees, they all of a sudden had to take a lot of risk during the pandemic. So they might have exposed services on the internet that were not properly secured, and they might have allowed employees to move some of the data over to their personal workstations, and hereby not being able to have the needed control over sensitive data. So one of their big challenges will be both during the pandemic and also after the pandemic is to kind of rethink the IT setup, like how are they going to support it going forward? And yeah, security is risk-based. So of course, you can just hope that at least the luck falls on a lot of these companies, that they're going to go to a point where they actually have time and resources to focus on the security. And then the question was also related to what is most crucial for success and survival. And to be honest, I From my perspective, I actually don't think it's that different as it is on any other time, because cybersecurity is about defending against current threats, understanding where IT is going, and defending according to that world. So it's always crucial to be aware of the trends, both in the attack and defend accordingly, but also how IT in itself is developing, like we are seeing now, more cloud-based and so forth. So one of the things that I think is very important to keep a focus on in a situation like this where we're greatly impacted is that we can easily forget about cybersecurity threats, because right now everything is about the pandemic, everything it's doing to people, how people are feeling. And people might forget about cybersecurity, probably not people here on this webinar or this debate, but other employees who are not working with cybersecurity every day. So I think it's important for us, the cybersecurity professionals, to help them remember that the cybersecurity threats are still there, and it's still a real threat. It's still something we need to focus on. I think that was it for me.
All right, thanks a lot for this very detailed explanation. I love that you actually break down these questions into many points which are relevant, and also relate back to the other two presentations, which are like, it seems everything is coming together. So let's see what's coming next from Luke about this question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So yes, I mean, I can only really echo a lot of what Lorna said. Fundamentally, we can't expect any sort of radical change to appear. When you wake up this morning, maybe it's a bit frustrating. Now I have to actually get up an hour or two before my meeting and go into work, as opposed to maybe a little more shortly before your first meeting. But other than this, you know, the world won't have seen some big change. It's not like P equals NP after all, or some fundamental quantum computers are now suddenly far more available and useful than we thought, right? The basics of security will go on as they have before. Attackers will attack, and attackers are intelligent agents, right? They're gonna, if somehow we magically reached a state where we were managing to block every viable cyber attack, well, people aren't gonna continue trying useless attacks that don't provide economic returns for the attackers. They're gonna employ new methods that do work. It's true, perhaps to some extent. I think that the characterization Lorna did between company sizes is very true. I mean, at the very small end, you have very small, often very agile firms. I mean, the way most startups, certainly in the Nordics and quite a few other places, are working, they're building on all the different sort of modern web technologies and stacks. They're not really building a lot of their infrastructure and so on themselves. They are already cloud native, and they are pretty ineffective. I mean, they indeed, most startups are lucky to own a proper office to begin with. So frankly, everyone having to work in their bedroom was the same as probably pretty much the situation they found themselves in before. Again, a lot of larger firms, you know, have long been exploring having employees working from home, providing things. These are simply things that you find on large corporate IT agendas. We should have suitable VPNs and so on. As the first speaker mentioned as well, yes, some of them were maybe a little underspecified for COVID, but these aren't radical changes, right? These are small accelerations to trends we've seen before. Adding a little bit more VPN capacity, I mean, it's not a radical departure from where we were. Again, I think the big trends that have been around well before COVID are things like bring your own device, these sorts of trends. Partly indeed what we saw with the zero trust model. A very good implementation is indeed Google's Beyond Corp. And I mean, and frequently when you talk at the larger end, these are things that are seen as the gold standard, well, what a lot of sort of large scale corporate IT departments are driving towards. In the middle, especially in countries like Denmark, you have the sort of the much stranger thing, government sector, things like this. And this is where you much more find organizations, which, I mean, sort of people who would have logged into a talk like this in the evening probably do find more surprising. You get these workers who still have Post-its with passwords under their laptops, you know, whatever. And these things, yes, I mean, they're incredibly difficult employees to protect, but they were that when they were at home or they were at work anyway. I mean, these things are part of the very nature of what you're doing in cybersecurity. And fundamentally, yes, I mean, there are solutions. There are these sorts of more, you know, no one on the network or system is trusted. We have all our different layers of defense. You know, we provide services, and we try to make some sort of intelligent guess about what identity should be given access to what. But nothing has transformed in some truly dramatic way. And I'm sorry if it's a bit of a disappointing answer, really. I was looking for something where I could say, and I think one of the trends that really, I mean, a lot's accelerated, right? And they're good, productive reasons. Right? The big shock a lot of corporations find from sort of management perspective is actually if you have your employees working home a lot of the time, when they are come in 1-2 days a week, as is the sort of de facto model a lot of places in Denmark, well, they are a lot more productive. They're a lot more engaged. They spend a lot of their time face to face, putting in 10 little meetings in the course of their day, talking to people, generally actually get more out of the sort of social dynamics at work and so on. And then they may go home basically for 5 days and actually produce some sort of productive thing and come back again. Indeed, if you look at academia, that's pretty much been the model for ages. And the big trend, I think, whether is companies are now shifting. They're realizing this. There's some real questions being asked. Do we need the headcounts we need? Is there some day we can get these essentially, 20 hours of productive work we get out of each employee each week in some sort of more efficient way? And probably the big trend that will try to supplement and enable this is increasing adoption of various automation technologies. And there, I think, some of our more traditional security intuitions break down. I think sort of people on this call will all have seen things like, at the more extreme end, fooling image recognition systems, where you can put up, road signs that are read as road signs, and along the street you'll have something that looks like a page of sort of binary noise, black and white dots, but it'll be a carefully tuned image that the car's road sign reading AI system, image recognition algorithm will read as 1,000 miles an hour speed limit, and the car will speed up or whatever. Right? This is demonstrated. There's a nice little piece of Israeli research where they do it with a little drone flying alongside the car. So these sorts of things have been done, and in general, we will adopt more and more of these systems. And these systems aren't like us, right? They're not at all intelligent in the way we are, but they see the world from a very unusual lens. You're looking at me now through the camera, you're focusing on my face. What I'm saying, you're not worrying about the top 2 pixels in the left-hand bit of the corner that may be flickering and possibly indicating some sort of pattern. I mean, I'm not, incidentally, sending some complex pattern in my picture, but yeah. Anyway, the point is these sorts of things, I think, is where we'll run into more problems. I don't really think COVID will return, you said 2 years from now, and, there'll be a, whatever, HAL 9000 robot looking down on you as you walk into the office, right? But it is certainly, I think, opening the idea that these technologies could be adopted to a greater extent. Again, I'm not a financial expert either, but as Lorna pointed out, we may be in for a sort of tumultuous world of economic changes. And there is some precedent for new technology being adapted following a financial crash. If you go back to things like the Great Depression in the 20s, at that time, a lot of American factories weren't electrified, essentially using electricity to produce goods. And what happened was that the technology was well proven and established at the time. It simply just made economic sense to keep running in the ways you had previously. But once the Depression completely wiped out what there was, when you started to build back up, you saw this mass adoption of electrified technologies at the time. Again, some of our AI technologies are starting to become, and I really do dislike that word, it's horribly misused. But some of these, shall we say, smarter than previous algorithms are now ready for prime time. And we would expect that if there really is a collapse and a rebuilding, that we would actually see these deployed to a much greater extent. And I think there's some interesting opportunities for some cybersecurity havoc. I think I'm running out of my 5 minutes, so I'll stop there, but we can always follow up and talk more about playing with those sorts of systems.
All right, thanks a lot for being timely. I would move on to the next phase, which is to actually get all the panelists involved. All right, so I have a first question actually for Martin. And the question is, what do you think characterizes the infrastructures of an organization that will be respectively well and poorly fit to deal with the volatility of the cybersecurity landscape?
Yeah, I think that in the short term, some of the business that have focused on basic hygiene and best practices such as patch management, hardening, identity and access management, especially around managing privileged user accounts that we also talked about, do use multi-factor authentication and have a fairly well-defined perimeter, whatever that be in an on-prem data center or in the cloud for that matter, and maybe also have some experience with cloud services. I think will be in a good position going forward. I think in the long run, businesses that will adopt to a more flexible way of working and adopting at least some of the principles in zero trust, I think will be also a good position for success. And maybe just to comment on the part where, of course, budgets may be cut. I think that people at the same time also realize that they really have to invest in IT simply to keep their business running. And in some cases also what I tried to exemplify with the SolarWinds case versus Zero Trust is that some of the very effective controls that you can implement are actually not expensive. And so it would be an interesting project to run, maybe for Oksana at some point, to figure out why do companies not follow best practice. I mean, if you look at SANS top 20 security controls, a lot of them are well understood. They're not expensive, and I think would be a good trade-off for people focusing on the next AI product. That's my 2 cents.
All right, thanks a lot. Next question is for Lone. And the question is, your job requires to defend the weak ones, but you can also think like the bullies. From these perspectives, what do you consider to be the most critical blind spots that organizations should address, and how can they find them if their budget is light?
Yeah. I think that one of the more critical blind spots, at least, is when cybersecurity is not seen as a moving target, because what might be sufficient protection yesterday might not be sufficient protection today. And what I encounter a lot is comments like, but we have always done it that way, or comments like, but it passed the review last time, or things similar to that. So not understanding that it's a moving target. What we accept for an encryption level today is not what we're going to accept for an encryption level in a few months. So everything is moving. And especially also when we look at some of the changes we have seen because of the pandemic, like working from home. And then there is a lot of old standards and old best practices that we need to change, that we also spoke about. I spoke about them before, the 2 others mentioned it as well. Moving away from this perimeter-centric defense into identity-centered defense, and working with microsegmentation, working with zero trust, and so on. And talking about working from home, another blind spot is also security awareness that I spoke a little bit about before as well. We are so used to working closely together, like this form of communication that we have in the office, which could also include like asking a colleague, what do you think about this suspicious mail? And the communication form is changed when we are more separate. And we need to kind of understand that. And also from my perspective, I'm not an expert in how humans are working, and the communication part. So we need kind of input in that in order to understand the aspect of awareness. Yeah, and the reason why I'm mentioning awareness is, of course, that a lot of attacks, they start out with phishing or with some other social engineering task. I wouldn't call this a blind spot because we are so aware of this, but it's definitely something that we need to kind of deal with and that we need to address. I don't believe that awareness is the answer, to be honest. I believe it's important and it's a continuous task, something we need to be aware of no matter what. So, but we also need to remember that we are just humans. We make mistakes. We can get stressed out one day and not really read through an email, just click on the link and enter our password because it looks like something we have seen before. So I think as security professionals, we just need to keep working on solutions where we can try to prevent these attacks in different ways, but also where we can try to detect it. So, and that's also the difference between the perimeter defense and the identity defenses, that we kind of also go to the point where we acknowledge that a breach is going to happen to our network. And even though we are protecting our identities, we also need to acknowledge that a breach can happen, and we need to be able to detect it and be able to defend against it when it happens, so we can minimize it. And then to the question about the budget, which is a difficult question, to be honest, but I do believe that the most important thing is having the right resources. And it's a little bit linked to what Martin also just said, because a lot of solutions can be cheap to implement, but if you don't have the right people, to say what to do, then you just have a lot of salespeople calling you and you don't know which direction to go to. So having the right resources there, that's where, in my opinion, the budget is spent best, because that person will then have the capability to prioritize. Instead of having, for example, you can have a security level here and then like spend a lot of money and lift it to here. But if you looked at the area over here, that was actually a weak point. That resource would be able to identify that, and then maybe you can lift that security up to here without even actually spending something. So definitely resources, I think, if your budget is tight, because it's the people who can make the differences.
I think you make a great point about competences, and I think that's also why we're here actually debating this stuff, because we think it's important to get these ideas out and to get going with more and better security. Shameless plug here. So the last question is for Luke. I would like to ask you, when developing innovative solutions, how can you take the volatile threat pictures into account?
Well, the volatile threat pictures are wonderful when you want to do innovation, right? These are the things that genuinely drive it. It's very hard to articulate the value of some sort of exploration. We're going to go in this direction because we think it's better, and hopefully we'll find something and it'll be 10 times more profitable than what we were doing previously. It's far easier to build momentum around, we need to run in a new direction, because where we are currently, we're very, very exposed and in a lot of danger. And I think this is one of the unique things about cybersecurity and innovation in that area is, I mean, if you go back to the example of Lorna's hands just a second ago, I mean, I think what you were trying to say is, I mean, attackers take the route of least resistance, right? You want to spend your budget wisely. Well, if you've invested vast amounts in physical security, but your network is comically insecure, well, people aren't going to go to the trouble of abseiling through the roof of your building. They're going to log in through your unsecured telnet server or whatever. And the same sort of thing applies. I mean, innovation is really hard to get right. I mean, it exists in this sort of slightly unstable, peculiar environment. You have a group of people. I mean, normally you ask people, how do you make innovation happen? And they'll say, well, it's pretty wonderful. You have to give people psychological safety. They should have freedom to fail. There should be time to experiment and so on. And all these things are, of course, true. And you ask people, well, do you want to work in environments like that? And everyone says, absolutely, it's wonderful. But if you compare to the places that really are hotbeds of innovation that manage to do these things, what you mostly hear in places in Silicon Valley and so on are these endless tales of burnout and the sort of brutality of this culture. And it seems that places that do successfully innovate, that produce these sorts of things, they have to balance a lot of these sorts of properties, like psychological safety or freedom to failure, has to be balanced, for example, with quite a strong, frankly call it an intolerance for incompetence, right? People should certainly be free to be failing, but they should be the very, very best people who are experimenting around, who are then failing and so on. And this often makes for very, very difficult types of cultures. And the real benefit that threats bring on the table here is that they push that forward. The nature of cyber threats are so brutal, so, once an attack works, it can be infinitely replicated in no time and so on. It's very easy, but I mean, literally, we love the phrase owned in our industry, right? Once you lose, it's normally not in doubt. You are absolutely, totally lost, right? And this is, in some ways, quite a good tool to spur innovation, right? To sit down, to have wide-ranging talks, to let maybe some of the more wild and crazy threats that you can dream up be what drives a few design decisions. Certainly if there is the budget and the freedom and so on to genuinely innovate, well, then having good creative sources of threats, and it is creative work, right? Whenever you come across some sort of really good exploit or something, there's always that one step in it where you go, I've got you so far, yeah, I'm following along. And then there's like, oh, that's brilliant. I'd never thought of that sort of step. And that's what makes for really good things. And that is in itself a kind of innovation. And they can be a really good spark to, if you're looking into products, if you're looking into designs that really will have some sort of game-changing effect. Yes, threats are a real gift. I've found it much easier to foster innovation under threat of something than in some sort of situation with, do you think there might be a way to do this better, faster, cheaper? Yeah. Does that sort of answer your question?
That's your answer. So yes, I'd like to thank you all actually for the quite insightful comments and answers. You talked about a lot of stuff. You talked about cloud agility, moving to a different threat scenario where we go to zero trust, all the issues that we have with budget and businesses who have to deal with, like, juggle multiple balls, right, to deal with the cuts and to deal with the cost of doing cybersecurity, the point about having to get the right people, to get the right culture, to actually implement effective cybersecurity. And I think all of these are really relevant. I would like to give the word just to wrap up to Oksana, who hasn't spoken yet. So if you want to comment on this too, please.
Right. Thank you. So I just wanted to add up. So both you, Martin, and you, Lon, talked about awareness, and to me, it is an important topic. It's about my research that I do, and I fully agree that it is very important. And I fully agree with Lon that you do need awareness. You do need to help people, and I believe it's our responsibility as a security community to help end users how to protect themselves. But also, I fully agree that we cannot put the responsibility just on the users, because yes, they will fail, not because they're lazy or stupid or incompetent, but because they are human beings, and its security is a secondary task. So people don't actively think about security when they read their emails, when they browse the web, when they talk to their friends on messengers. So they will make mistakes, and this is something you unfortunately cannot avoid. And it is challenging to provide security awareness measures that help, also who don't have technical expertise. But again, you can't rely just on the users being aware and doing everything to protect themselves. We have to take responsibility as well, and companies have to take responsibility as well. And there is also what Martin mentioned about the awareness among the developers, because to me it seems also like an important and challenging topic. So as you said, Martin, yes, actually the best practices, they are very well known, they are very well studied, and they're actually cheap to implement. The question is why are companies not doing this? Or are they not aware of these best practices? And if so, why are they not aware? Because also the problem is there are trainings for companies. And for example, I know that ITU provides trainings for companies. There are other universities, other institutions that provide these trainings. But the problem is, and it is also what we touch upon in our project that I talked about, is people just don't take these trainings. And this is for different reasons. So I guess, again, the question we have to ask here, how do we motivate people, and also how do we create this security culture among in the companies, among developers, among the managers, that people do understand the importance of security and they need to prioritize security sometimes, especially in the presence of threats. I think this is all from myself.
I think you touched onto some really interesting issues. Also, I'd like to also mention the point that it was discussed before also by Martin, this idea of zero trust, and that we should move away from this idea that we have a perimeter that is trusted, and that this is the way we operate. We should rather think about assets and users and identities and what kind of access they have to the assets that we want to protect. In this sense, also the idea of using technologies for doing detection and also trying to recover from existing attacks. Well, that's I think a big part of the way going forward as well. And as well as all the things you talked about, which I think are really important about the culture, both on the side of the small and medium enterprises and what developers should be doing with new technologies going forward. I'd like to start with the questions that we got on YouTube. I'm so glad that the audience is actually also participating in this. So I'll go with the first one, which is from Syed to Martin. And the question is, how do we balance between risk acceptance and risk mitigation strategies?
Yeah, that's always the good question, and I think it really depends on the line of business that you're in. I think one way to start is to really accept that you cannot protect everything. So one way to start is to figure out what are the few critical services that you really have to protect, and then start there. I think that in general, and I have probably also been guilty of that, everyone, all InfoSec professionals, they want to protect everything, every little device on the network, while in fact it's not the most effective way, and probably also not what makes sense. So really getting down to what needs to be protected, and then focus there. One way to start would maybe be to figure out which risk framework you could use to model the risks. Could be something like the FAIR model. You could couple it with a pen test to figure out where you have weaknesses in your controls. Maybe you have some security metrics that you could throw into the equation, and then I think quite quickly you would be able to figure out where it really makes sense to focus and invest. And again, some of the basic controls are fairly cheap, so it's not always about just adding yet another tool.
All right, thanks for the answer. The next question is to Lone, and the question is, if SMEs have vulnerable services during the pandemic, they surely also had vulnerable services in the pre-pandemic world. So I don't understand why the pandemic would change that. And I think this points back to the idea that things are not fundamentally different in this new world.
No, so it really differentiates what kind of small business we're talking about, right? So if we have the new small businesses, I don't think, like it was also said by Luke, I don't think there's a big difference. But there are other small companies that are older who are relying on much more like older infrastructure. They have an office because they always had an office, and they have workstations there, and somebody put up a firewall. They have a perimeter defense. They were never able to work from home. They were not able to check their email. They were not able to do any tasks. When they all of a sudden leave, they're going to start to open up. And I work in Bang & Olufsen, but I also have my own company, and I do pen testing. And I was doing a pen test this summer, and they accidentally exposed a domain controller on the internet, because they had to open for the firewall, and you see these things, and then they have to set up, maybe they have a really old VPN or a really old firewall, and they use the VPN capabilities in there, and there's a lot of like vulnerabilities maybe in that software that has never been updated, and they didn't use it before, so it was not a threat, and now they then open up in order to do something, and you have new threats. So there can be many things in this area that then differentiate the exposure they had because they didn't open up before.
So this relates a lot back to this idea of having no perimeters, so our zero trust scenario again.
Exactly, and we have some of the newer small companies have that, like Luke said, because they're more cloud-based. They never had a perimeter, they never had an office. So for them, no, nothing was really different. They might have a lot of vulnerabilities. We see a lot of people that start working with cloud who doesn't know anything, and by default everything is open, they throw it up, yay, we have it running, everything is good, but they had the same issues before. So I completely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. And the next question is for Luke. Kim would like to ask you, since you mentioned that cheating AI system are becoming a thing, do you think that the pandemic will make companies more vulnerable to traditional social hacking?
I mean, the span of companies, I think as we've run into, is incredibly broad, right? I think that there's a group of users. I was reminded a bit when Martin spoke of my time. I was thinking back about this thing about password security. And I indeed also had a Commodore, and I had a bunch of passwords. And even in those ages, I did indeed write them down in a little notebook. But even then, I'd sort of realized that notebook seemed important, even if there was nothing very exciting inside those computers. And it was a sort of treasured possession, and I protected it. I think I think the vulnerability of social problems speaks to something deeper, something also the researcher Oksana also mentioned. I mean, I think fundamentally you have to realize a lot of getting this sort of awareness, getting this sort of, I mean, because everyone sort of understands what's required, right? You need to be a bit suspicious. You need to sort of block the regular workflows, have some sort of slightly suspicious mind, right? And it's incredibly hard to develop that sort of psychological approach in some people. I mean, there were classic sort of personality analysis things like big 5-factor personality, right? And there's literally one of the traits there, which is agreeableness, right? How inclined are you, just if generally people are around you, to go along with what's said? And you go deeper into sort of social psychology, there's things like, I believe it's called the Solomon-Asch experiment, this thing where you draw a bunch of lines. So you have like 10 people come into a room. In reality, only one of them is the test subject. Everyone else is in on it. And the sort of experimenter shows a card with a bunch of lines on, and everyone in the room says, like, which is the shortest of these 5 lines, and everyone picks obviously the wrong line. And the amazing thing is the vast majority of people will go along and will conform, and even though they can clearly see it's not the shortest line, they'll agree with everyone else in the room, right? It's a very well documented psychological effect. And I think you have to sort of remember this when we're trying to build that thing about being scammed and the sort of social human effects, right? People are at a workplace. They, in most cases, aren't shareholders. They don't passionately care that whether the company became more profitable today, right? They've been given a bunch of computers and forced to work in front of them by some sort of evil manager, right? They may sort of reasonably enjoy their jobs. I'm not presenting everything as being horrible, but they're not that invested, right? They're much more concerned about dropping their own phone down the toilet when they go for a break or whatever than they are worried about someone breaking into the corporate computers, unless they're involved in security. So it is very hard to get people to protect something where they're not that invested in its protection itself. And I mean, yes, they're very inclined to go along with sort of big social manipulation. I mean, these things are deep, primal things that have been in us, right from the start as sort of chimpanzees. I don't think that there's ever any real hope to get rid of this. It'll always be with us. The biggest thing that really drives meaningful engagement with people wanting to play an active role in protecting their companies is that they're more invested. I mean, people who own stock in it, who are somehow more committed, or people who work for NGOs, these sorts of organizations, where they really passionately care about the mission and so on. You'll normally find those, if you're doing a pen test or security work for them, far more eager to push back and to build real meaningful security, far more employees that are uniformly committed. Because again, we just need that one weak link. We just need the one disaffected employee who really cannot care less to click on our link or to do whatever it is we needed them to do, right? And I mean, you're always going to find a few of them. I don't see COVID. Maybe, I mean, if COVID unleashes a wave of sort of economic, financial troubles, people are seeing pay cuts, absence of bonuses, these types of things, maybe there'll be a bit more dissatisfaction and people will be a little more, what the hell? I'll click on the link and get a free iPhone. I don't care. It's my work computer, right? Maybe we'll see a small increase in that. But again, I would be surprised if it was particularly dramatic. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it's great to point out exactly this fact that we need to work with our nature and not to work against our nature. So we need to use our strengths and recognize that we have inherent weaknesses that we need to be aware of, and also make sure we get around those. So my next question would be to Oksana, actually, from our from Andrada, and it would be about what was the hardest subject in your research that you tried to get answers on from the companies that you approached. So what was the hardest bit to actually ask about, and why do you think is that?
The hardest bit, right? So I had to say I was not the person doing the interviews, so maybe I'm not the best person to answer this. But when we analyze the data, when we discuss this, essentially the question is you do ask people to talk about their own shortcomings or about shortcomings of their colleagues and bosses. And of course, we ensure that we do protect the participants. We told them it will be confidential, of course. We will not publish their names or any other identifying information. This is solely for research purposes. But still, this was my concern going into the project, that when you ask people what is going on, what is your company doing wrong, people will not answer. Again, as Luke has said, some people are just not really willing to talk about these things.
Yeah.
So either they want to give a better impression of themselves than they are, and they will say, yes, everything is running great, we are the best company ever in terms of security. I mean, I'm simplifying here, of course, but this is the attitude you could kind of have expected. Or even if they're not, even if they have their motivation to maybe protect their colleagues, they don't want to say bad things about what their colleagues are doing wrong. They don't want to say what their bosses are doing wrong. So we had concerns about speaking about sensitive subject in general, and whether they will be willing actually to talk about their problems with us. It turned out not to be the case. We still, or not to be the case to a lot of extent. We did manage to get some valuable responses from them, but still, this is always a question. If you ask people about how they're doing and not actually able to observe them, you rely a lot on their self-reporting, and again, you have to deal with a lot of subjectivity in this kind of research.
Yeah, I think getting precise and accurate answers is probably the hardest bit of doing this type of surveys, right?
Yes.
And also getting around the inherent personal issues with releasing this type of information. So I would like to ask one last question to Martin, and then we could wrap up the evening, so that we've been already 1 hour and a half together. I think it's been so far a great conversation. Last question to Martin, and it is, according to a new survey from Capgemini, 69% of organizations believe they will not be able to respond to security threats without AI. So why do you think this is the case?
That's a good question. I don't know that survey actually.
Neither
but
do I.
If you're asking me for an educated guess, I would assume that it's simply because if you look at larger businesses, the amount of logging and the amount of signals that is required to perform security monitoring with is increasing quite a lot, and the only real way to analyze the data as it's being logged and so on is to use machine learning, AI, and so on.
I think it makes sense. I think it's a reasonable answer to that, and that also means that more and more stress will be on AI systems to give reasonable answers to the security threats we're facing. Yes, do you want to say something, Luke?
Yeah, I would just say I completely agree with what Martin said. I mean, I don't think it's also just, as you said, to give reasonable answers, but that's perhaps what you were alluding at, but to explain themselves.
Yes.
I mean, it's not enough simply to have a neural network and say, because of this vast matrix of weights, I've made this decision. We need to understand something about the reasoning for it. And I think perhaps I haven't seen that survey either, but I'd imagine the other half of why there's such drive for AI is this sort of constant vigilance, right? The sort of security defense I think that's being alluded to there. Well, if you're going to have someone sit 24/7 in a monitoring center watching things, I mean, this is tiring, repetitive work. You know, it's exactly what people are incredibly bad at. Yeah. Waiting for that time at 3:15 in the morning when the alarm goes. You know, people are awful at that sort of thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's partly the sort of asymmetry of attack and defense. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe just a final comment, and that is, personally, I don't think that we will be able to replace security operations center workers with AI necessarily, but definitely a lot of these new ways to analyze data and reason about it, get more insights into it, is a very good tool for SOC analysts.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thanks a lot for the great debate we had tonight. I would just want to have a last round of comments if you want. So Lone, would you want to get your closing remarks?
Let me think. I definitely think one of the things to go away with, which we also talked about, is the core essence about cybersecurity is to adapt to the threats that are there. So, and that's what we're doing in pandemic, and we need to adapt to those threats. And I think the pandemic has also pushed us a little bit to go in the direction where we need to go by changing the way that we're thinking about securing, which we talked about today, identity centric defenses.
Okay. Thank you. Martin?
Yeah. There's been a lot of mentioning and talk about awareness, and that is absolutely good. I think the industry is still lagging a bit behind in some ways to find more effective ways to perform awareness training, because at least personally, I have gone through, I don't know how many tons of online awareness courses, and first of all, they're super boring, and I don't think that they really have the intended effect that they should have. So it has to be more tailored. It has to be more engaging ways to perform awareness training, and I think that at least for certain user groups within a company, you have to do a lot more. You have to to involve them more. You need to have more personal conversations with them. You have to work more closely with them to really make an impact, because I think only when you achieve to work closely with them, you will be able to for them to learn what it is that you very often try to articulate or teach them or nudge them towards. And that's certainly also true for a lot of good developers. They obviously do not intend or have any desire to do, let's say, crazy or insecure stuff, but sometimes they're just very pressured to deliver, and being able to have that more colleague-to-colleague relationship, I think, is very important.
All right, thank you.
Can I add a comment to that?
Of course.
Yes, I completely agree. But one thing that we worked a little bit with as well is gamification. In my previous job, not right now, but gamification in the form of awareness, making it into a competition, making it more fun, like so that it kind of gets under your skin in other ways. So you kind of have this, I don't know, weekly or monthly, where you can make some different things.
I think we need to really move in this direction to involve people in a different way than just providing them with a bunch of material to read and then be prepared to actually do the stuff when it comes to enact the whole situation. Just the last two comments. I would ask Oksana to make her final remarks, and then Luke.
Yes. So I would also add on the topic of awareness once again. And so several people, I think all of you at some point has mentioned that companies have to be flexible. Companies have to learn how to adapt, how to deal with new challenges, how to be able to adapt to new technologies, new threats. And this also ties in with awareness. And this once again underlines why the approach of just making all the employees to go through a training and then forgetting all about it. And this is one reason why this approach doesn't work. First, from the pedagogical perspective, well, if you just do something once and then never speak about it again, never use it again, you just forget the knowledge that you might have acquired. But also because cybersecurity is ever-changing, and people do need to be aware of the developing situation all the time. And this is why the awareness measures that are implemented, of course, they have to involve the users. They have to actually look at what people need, what is the best way to reach out to them, but also some kind to involve them on a regular basis, on a continuous basis, not just as a one-time event is also what is needed.
All right. Luke?
No, I can only echo what everyone else said. I mean, the ones who thrive in a cybersecurity environment are the ones who can evolve faster than their competitors, right? Yes. A very nice model is this concept of an ODA loop. It's a bit like this plan, do, check, act type of cycle you see in managing various processes. The ODA one is a bit more built for sort of strategic level. It's observe, orient, decide, act. It has its origins, I think, in the American military. But the big sort of conclusion from their sort of study of, what sort of armies, big protracted struggles over years, new technologies are invented, which kind of organizations win, were the ones that can complete this ODA loop cycle as quickly as possible and keep speeding up the tempo they cycle through it. And I think much is true again of defending against cyber attacks and building robust cyber defense. You need to be able to evolve, and the ones that can evolve faster than the others will see a lot less attacks hitting them and generally a much more positive things. The ones that begin to lag behind will suffer more and more. Yeah.
All right, thanks a lot for your final remarks. I think it's been actually a very interesting and insightful conversation we just had, talking about a whole range of topics, considering different threat scenarios and perimeters, considering moving to cloud and agile working and software development as well, considering the human factor, considering the economics of this whole situation, how it will affect us. And I think the nice thing I've seen about tonight is that we have, at least I hope we do, have some foot on reality, and that's what makes me hopeful that we can actually make these changes that are needed to move to better security practices. So I would like to thank you all for tonight. I would like to also thank the audience for the questions. It's great that actually the questions come from the audience that are very interested, and this is great. I would like to point out that we have more events coming up. We're trying to differentiate also a bit. We have an event that will be dedicated to high school students to get them involved in the field of cybersecurity. So if you have kids or know people who have maybe kids who want to get engaged in cybersecurity, get them to join us in the future events we have there. We also have more technical events coming up. We will, of course, deliver the details about all these events very soon. So if you stay tuned on Meetup, you will get all the notifications about the new events that we have. I would also really like to thank all the volunteers who've helped make this event possible. So a big thank you to Josephine, to Andrada, to Klaus, to Jens, to Jeff, to Dakota. It's been really helpful, and it's been great to see a lot of work going on here to organize such a successful night. So thanks a lot, everybody. And with this, I would close. Thank you very much for joining.
Goodbye.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.